Hi, I'm Angela Walters, and welcome to the Free-motion Challenge Quilting Along, Becoming Successful with Swirls. In this video, we're going to do just a little bit of traveling to quilt the Concentric Swirl, a design that's going to add a custom look to your quilting. I'll show you how to quilt it on a sewing machine as well as a long arm, and you're going to learn some fun variations. Well, let's get to it.
What I really love about this design is it only has 3 steps. You're going to start by quilting a little curl, a small little swirl. Then you're going to echo around it, except this time you're going to stop when you run into something. Once I'm touching something, whether it's a previously quilted line or an element of the quilt, I'm going to travel along it about 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to echo it again, stopping when I run into something. And then I'm going to repeat traveling and echoing until I decide I'm done with the swirl. It doesn't matter how many times you echo the swirl, but when you're ready to move on to the next one, what I'm going to do is travel back along the line I've just quilted, about 1/4 of an inch or so. Basically, I want to get out of that corner so that I can add my next little curl. And then echo my way back out, stopping when I run into something. Traveling and echoing. It's this little bit of traveling that makes the swirls look like they're laying on top of each other and really gives the design a look of depth. And now that we've got the hang of the basic design, all I have to do is keep repeating it. I'm going to back up along the line I've just quilted, quilt another little swirl, and continue on. Now try not to let the traveling intimidate you. We're just trying to get it as close as we can, because once you're done, you're only going to see the overall texture. I know I keep saying that a lot, but it's so true. You can't stop when you just have a few swirls. You have to keep going until you can see the whole thing. So when it comes to quilting the concentric swirl, it's as easy as swirl, echo, and travel. So if you're not sure what to do, just pick one. You have a 33% chance of being correct. Now, of course, I'm using this contrasting thread so that you can see what I'm doing. However, if you purchase the coordinating thread kit, go ahead and use the darker or brighter color on your quilt. Having the contrasting thread is really going to help you see where you're going, where to go next, but it's also going to let you see every little bump and bobble. Remember, you can't judge how it looks until it's all filled in, so try not to get discouraged. Just like with regular swirls, you can echo what you've previously quilted to move around an area. This is going to prevent all your swirls from going in a row and really help you maneuver around so that you don't get stuck. If you want to quilt the concentric swirls so that they highlight an area, all you have to do is travel along whatever element it is that you want to show off. So for instance, as I'm quilting the swirl, once I get to this dot, which is in my mind what I want to show off, I'm going to travel along the edge of that dot and continue echoing. It's that bit of traveling that will make the design look like it's going behind whatever element it is that you're showing off. Now, if you happen to be quilting around several elements, which is probably going to be the case on the quilts that you're working on, there's going to be situations where you won't have quite enough room to add another swirl. If that's the case, just add some arcs and some travel lines to fill in the space between them, then add another swirl once you have room. Those travel lines are really going to make that element pop out. So this is going to be something that I want to do around an element that I really want to show off, whether it's applique, some blocks, or even another quilting design. Perhaps the trickiest thing about quilting these concentric swirls is dealing with all the irregular spaces that you'll get between them. If you end up with an area that's too small to add a swirl, just add some echoes to fill it in. It really doesn't matter what you echo or if you're just making it up. As long as you fill in the whole area, it's going to look fine. So in between these 2 swirls, I'm just going to add some arcs and fill in that space until I have room to add my next swirl. As I'm quilting, I'm focusing on keeping the line smooth. Sure, I'd love to have it consistently spaced. It's going to look better that way. But if I have to pick between consistent spacing or a smooth line, I'm going to go for the smooth line every time. Because even if it isn't perfect, it will still give it the illusion that it is if those lines are nice and smooth. So I've taught this design enough that I know the common mistakes that a lot of quilters make. Hey, they're the same mistakes that I made. The number one thing I want you to remember is to make your initial swirl nice and round. We don't want to make that first swirl too large because it's going to give us too much unquilted area to fill in. So as I back up and I quilt my initial swirl, I'm kind of thinking of a nickel size or something nice and small so that all I have to do is echo around the outside of it. Let's pretend that you are so focused on not peeing your pants that you make the first swirl a little too big. So here I have a longer swirl, it's a lot wider and further apart. As I echo around the outside of it, you're gonna notice when I come back, it's gonna leave me this weird unquilted area. It's not the end of the world, it just means we're gonna have to add a little bit more echoing to fill in those gaps. It's still gonna look fine, it's just gonna be a little bit easier on you if you make that first swirl nice and small. Once you learn how to quilt the swirl design, there are some fun variations you can do with this. One thing you can do is vary the spacing of your echoes. I know, I've said up to this point to keep the spacing as consistent as possible, but if you want to give your design a slightly different texture, make some of your echo lines closer and some of them further apart. If you use this variation on your quilts, try to make sure that there's enough difference in between the spacing that it looks like it's intentional, even if it isn't. So for instance, if I'm using a 1/4 inch spacing, I might vary the spacing to have a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch. I'm not worrying about whether I end on a skinny or a wide echo, or if I have two of the same next to each other. It's just that for the most part, I'm trying to switch in between those spacings. Now the hardest part about quilting this design on your quilts is if you get hungry, it's going to start looking like cinnamon rolls. Speaking of, I think I want a cinnamon roll right now. What I love about the design is that this unquilted area is what is most noticeable. It's going to add a softer look, a little bit less dense, and it's just a nice way to change up the design. So now that you know how the basics of the concentric swirl go together, let's see how to quilt it on a long arm. Now you'll notice right off the bat that I'm using a different fabric. It could be that I accidentally deleted the video that I originally recorded on the actual quilt. Or it could not be. I mean, I could just be making that up. So I pulled out this print fabric so that I could just whip up another sample so that you can see what it looks like on the long arm. When quilting this design, everything is still the same. The steps, the basic way it goes together, all the variations, all that fun stuff. But you might notice that quilting those curves can get a little tricky. And really it's because you're managing those two different sets of wheels. It's almost like trying to draw a curve with an Etch-a-Sketch. I promise that the more comfortable you get with the movement of the machine, the nicer that your swirls are going to look. And hey, using this fabric is a good illustration of using that traveling to highlight elements in the fabric. So here we have these nice big letters. I'm quilting right over the top of some of them, but on others I'm adding traveling to make them pop out. I think this would be something really fun to do, highlighting different letters in the fabric. But that's for another day. Since there's a little bit of traveling in between each of these echo lines, that means this design is going to take a little bit longer to quilt. So I prefer to use it in areas that you can actually see it, such as solid fabrics or tonal fabrics. If I'm working with a busier fabric, I'm just going to do a basic swirl because you can't tell all the effort I'm putting into it anyway. However, if there's some part of the quilt that I really want to show off, I love to quilt this design around it. The beautiful texture and the traveling really helps highlight elements or other parts of your quilt that you really want to show off.
Of course, there's some other fun ways you can use this design. Using the traveling and the echoing, you can fill in between other quilting designs, such as wavy lines, to give your design a little bit more contrast. Now it's your turn. Go ahead and try the concentric swirls or a fun variation on your quilt. For more specific instructions, you can check out the description box below because I have a link to quilting diagrams. Well, I'll see you next week when we learn how to quilt pebbles and combine them with our concentric swirls.